If you follow directions, we are here for money.
It almost feels like you're watching like Heat, you know, like a classic kind of heist action movie. Folks, if you know us at Joe Blow, then you know that we are die-hard fans of action films, especially the ones made today that evoke that sort of nostalgia that we get from some of our favorite action fare from the 80s and 90s. Take, for example, the subject of today's video, the underrated gem known as Den of Thieves. That's right, folks, and I figured with Den of Thieves 2, Pantera, now on home streaming, what better time for us to take a look at the original 2018 film and see what the f happened to this movie. So, as usual, I've got an expert on the film in the form of Travis Hobson for today's episode. So, let's give it to Travis.
If we're holding up the all-time best bank robbery movies, a special place is reserved for classics like Bonnie and Clyde, Dog Day Afternoon, Heat, and a handful more. But when it comes to the most underrated recent cinematic bank heists, Christian Gudegast's 2018 movie Den of Thieves ranks right up there with the most entertaining and hyper-violent examples like The Town, Point Break, Hell or High Water, and the like. Now that Gudegast unload Den of Thieves 2 Pantera on the masses this January, it's high time to reflect on the making of the original and what's in store for the souped-up sequel. While a tad long and baldly inspired by Michael Mann's Heat, Den of Thieves was released in January 2018 to commercial success and middling critical acclaim. For those in the dark, the story concerns a unit of former Marines turned bank robbers called the Outlaws, led by Ray Merriman, played by Pablo Schreiber, who directs a gallant mission to steal $30 million from the impenetrable Federal Reserve Building in Los Angeles, billed as the bank robbing capital of the world. As viewers watch the Outlaws orchestrate the heist with ruthless military precision, an equally hardened and morally compromised gang of Los Angeles County Sheriff detectives called the Regulars, led by Big Nick O'Brien, played by Gerard Butler, doggedly pursue the thieves at all costs. The story cuts back and forth between the heroes and villains, with the crooked cops and criminals becoming equally compelling characters, testing the viewer's sympathetic allegiance. Los Angeles native Christian Gudegast began his filmmaker career in the 1990s and logged his first writing credit with the 1997 TV movie Soldier of Fortune. After penning scripts for Rip It Off in 2001 and the Vin Diesel action flick A Man Apart in 2003, Gudegast wrote the screenplay for Den of Thieves with plans to make the film as early as 2003. According to Gudegast, the project was in the works for 14 years, dating back to a blind deal he and his writing partner had with New Line Cinema. When the rights lapsed and New Line lost the property, Den of Thieves moved to Relativity Media, the now defunct independent distributor and media company. With the project lingering for over a decade, Gudegast went 12 years without logging another writing credit. However, all that changed in 2016 when Gudegast wrote the script for London Has Fallen, a breathless action picture starring Gerard Butler. 2 years later in 2018, Butler and Gudegast reunited for Den of Thieves, continuing a fertile creative rapport that has led to Den of Thieves 2, Pantera. It may have taken a decade and a half for Gudegast to make Den of Thieves in his directorial debut, but finding Butler to star as Big Nick was a fortunate partnership worth the wait. Speaking about his inspiration for the project, Gudegast stated, quote, "I was fascinated by the specificity of their worlds and how these two crews operate. Understanding what they do and why they do it became the fuel for the movie," unquote. Strapped with a $30 million budget, principal photography on Den of Thieves began in January 2018 and wrapped after a 52-day film shoot. Despite the story being set in Los Angeles, the breakneck shoot occurred in the greater Atlanta area in Georgia to take advantage of the state's tax incentives. For instance, Ziggy's nightclub in the movie was filmed at Johnny's Hideaway in Atlanta. Addressing the Atlanta for a Los Angeles film shoot, Gudegast stressed the importance of authenticity, stating, quote, "When the production team arrived in Atlanta, I was hyper-specific when looking for how we were going to reproduce those elements there. It was down to how the murals on walls looked, the color scheme, rims on cars. So as careful as we were in choosing our locations, that same specificity applied to the shots where we sort of went for a hot Los Angeles weather look. Kind of smoggy and golden, but not pretty. At night, we play with the natural elements and there's a cooler blue metallic light," end quote. The Savings and Loan Bank scene in Pico Rivera was shot on Lakewood Avenue in Atlanta. The savage showdown between Big Nick and Merriman was filmed on Bluff Street. The visceral traffic jam shootout along the Alameda corridor was filmed on Murphy Avenue. The sequence took 10 days to film, using 4 city blocks and destroying 50 of the 250 cars allocated. 10,000 rounds of ammo were pumped out during the Alameda corridor sequence. The intense shootout was achieved by rigging machine guns with trunnion guns, quote, which are tubes rigged to go off at the same time as the big machine gun, unquote, according to special effects supervisor Yves DeBond. Quote, I wanted the hits to look more like a gouge, and we'd run an electrical loom to the car to fire it, end quote. The result creates a rapid-fire hail of bullets that appear as raw and realistic as possible. With characters firing up to 30 rounds every 2 seconds, an estimated 500,000 rounds were used while filming the final shootout alone. According to O'Shea Jackson Jr., residents nearby had to be warned to avoid calling the police before the shooting occurred. To prepare for his role as the ethically challenged Nick O'Brien, Gudegast encouraged Gerard Butler to gain 25 pounds, which the actor obliged. Butler also drew inspiration for his performance from Jay Dobbins, who was credited as an actor and a technical consultant on the movie. Dobbins is a former alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agent who made a career risking his life to infiltrate violent Los Angeles gangs and bring them to justice as an undercover officer. In describing Big Nick, Gudegast notes, quote, the character's a silverback gorilla who devours everything within reach. He's a force. He walks in and he just takes over the environment. Nick is classic. He's funny and he's a badass. He's in major crimes, so he's got to be. He's dealing with the worst of the worst every day, hunting them. We drilled that character all the way down and Jerry was unbelievable, end quote. Butler chimed in about what attracted him to the movie, adding, quote, what I love about this movie is that it has a taste, an ingredient, of many of my favorite films, like Heist and Heat, with touches of A Dog Day Afternoon and The French Connection. But it stands entirely on its own. It may be a complex heist film, but there's a surprising amount of heart and emotion. It has the potential to become one of those unforgettable movies because of the characters we've created, end quote. Beyond Butler's preparation, Gudegast divided the actors into 2 sides to train for their roles. Before filming, boot camps were set up with the police detectives on one side and the bank robbers on the other. The actors underwent extensive weapons training for 2 weeks to ensure their on-screen gunplay was fluid and authentic. The 2 groups handled real weapons to get a feel for the weight of each gun, but practiced shooting with paintballs to master firing on the move while walking, running, and jumping. The separate training regiments were also meant to foster camaraderie on each side and bolster their rivalry. Although each camp trained separately, it's easy to see how muscular and masculine the movie becomes. To this end, real-life UFC veterans Michael Bisping, Max Holloway, John Lewis, and Oleg Taktarov play various supporting cast members in Den of Thieves, adding to the retro machismo of halcyon day action classics that give the movie its badass edge. Gudegast stated, quote, they trained hard out on the firing range. They drilled and repetitioned until their movements with the firearms were completely fluid. They could load, unload, change mags. The way they manipulated the firearms was just awesome, end quote. Although Den of Thieves runs for a rather lengthy 140 minutes, Gudegast's original cut lasted 20 minutes longer. Most of the deleted scenes, which can be found on YouTube, involve intimate character development, with Big Nick and Ensign, played by Curtis Jackson, spending time with their families in between the heists. One scene features Nick and Debbie, played by Dawn Olivieri, hashing out their marital problems on the beach, with the former vowing to attend therapy. Another includes Ensign dealing with his daughters at home over breakfast. However, it's worth noting that Gudegast planned a much different ending for Den of Thieves than what made it into the theatrical cut. Also available online, the 2-minute alternate ending depicts Big Nick realizing that Donnie Wilson, played by O'Shea Jackson Jr., masterminded the entire heist the whole time. However, rather than fleeing to London to set up another robbery, Donnie is captured and jailed. Not only is the alternate ending much more conventional and anticlimactic than the theatrical version, but it also robs fans of a potential sequel. Thanks to the ending featured in the theatrical cut, Den of Thieves 2, Pantera, expands its sticky fingers to Europe for a brand new heist. Before detailing the specifics of the sequel, it's worth recognizing how commercially viable the original proved to be.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our Joe Blow channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
Upon its release in early 2018, Den of Thieves bagged $80 million in worldwide ticket sales, nearly tripling its modest $30 million budget. While most critics couldn't look past the movie's overt Heat imitation with wannabe Michael Mann aesthetics, Den of Thieves blasted its way to such a financial success that a sequel was inevitable. Writer-director Christian Gudegast has returned for the sequel, with Gerard Butler and O'Shea Jackson Jr. reprising their respective roles. Plot-wise, Pantera picks up immediately after Den of Thieves, with Big Nick tracking Donnie overseas to Europe, where both become entangled in a harrowing scheme to rob the London Diamond Exchange, while dealing with the notorious Panther Mafia. According to Butler, the sequel will have a more European flair, with much of the action set in the Diamond District in Marseille, France. Butler also promised that the sequel would be, quote, a lot more fun than the original, adding, the last one was down and dirty and dealt with marital issues and some heavy stuff, and climbed into the characters' souls, end quote. Butler also dished on Pantera's plot, assuring fans, quote, I see Donnie's at work, and I'm screwed if I'm going to sit my ass in LA and let this guy go and take over Europe. So I go to hunt him down, and it's very surprising where it takes us. It's a great script. Christian's a wonderful writer, end quote. The story takes place in Europe, but the movie was filmed in the UK and the Canary Islands. Photography took place in the capital city of Santa Cruz de Tenerife, which was used to recreate large French street locations, including a local pub, jewelry store, and police station. Although Den of Thieves 2 Pantera was originally scheduled for a domestic release in May 2023 and an international release in early 2024, the scheduling was shuffled when Lionsgate picked up the rights from STX Entertainment following Hasbro's acquisition of Entertainment One. As such, Pantera was pushed back for theatrical release on January 10th, 2025. Yeah, that's the gist of what the happened to Den of Thieves. Despite taking 14 years to be made, and even being an obvious Heat imitator, the hyper-violent action flick has broken into the vault of bank heist movies, ranking as one of the most underrated in its class.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. Joe Blow was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.